Happening in Sacramento, California, a second straight day of large demonstrations after the deadly police shooting of an unarmed African-American man on Sunday night. Tensions now running high in the city. Stephon Clark was 22 years old. He was a father of two. Police released body cam footage of the shooting on Wednesday night, and we want to warn you this video can be disturbing.
Show me your hands. Good.
The officers shot Clark in his grandmother's backyard. They had been investigating a suspect breaking into cars, and you can hear the officers. They think he had a gun. He was actually carrying a cell phone. They fired 20 shots, killing him. In that video, you can hear the officers at the scene mute their cameras soon after the shooting.
Go inside, please. Hey, you. Hey, you guys good?
The footage is now sparking a public outcry. After a full day of demonstrations, things heated up last night when a vigil for Clark turned into a standoff between officers and protesters. People surrounded a police car, kicking and climbing on it. Officers in riot gear showed up. It was tense for about a half hour, but did eventually calm down. Let's bring in Chad Latzer, president of Black Men at Penn, to talk more about this. Chad,
yeah.
I remember seeing this on Twitter last week. It was just starting, I think, people calling attention to what happened. When you hear the details, though, awfully disturbing.
Very disturbing, and I think we have to unpackage it. Once again, what we see is we see an unarmed African-American male. We're looking at toy guns as real guns. We're looking at cell phones as real guns. We're looking at people who go to church with Bibles as real guns, backpacks that are on people's backs as real guns. And what we're really looking at is how some police officers are engaging in implicit bias and unduly looking at black and brown people as suspicious.
Let me ask you this question. If the investigation was a tall suspect breaking into cars, why that aggression towards a person you think might be that suspect? Not a person shooting people in the streets or doing anything violent, breaking into cars. It's still a crime.
Yeah, certainly.
But why that level of aggression, do you think, towards that suspect?
Once again, I think it's because of the psyche of implicit bias that we're really not having conversations about in America. When we're looking at this whole aspect of black and brown bodies in position to being outside, being inside, having a cell phone, having a backpack on their backs, what we're looking at is the psyche lends itself to be that aggressive. So if we look at what happened with Mike Brown, when we look at what happened with Trayvon Martin, even though that was Zimmerman, when we look at what happened to Tamir Rice, and so forth and so on, and not just black men, but also black women, and brown men as well. And so when you see what these police officers engaged in, right, 20 shots, unloading, turning off their cameras, where's the transparency, right? And then they never identified themselves as police officers. And so that became a challenge as well. And then when we find out when we do a deep dive is that there's no gun.
There is no gun. And so what we hear is, show us your hands or put your hands up. And like in the Philando Castile case, he tried to identify that he did have a gun in the car. And he was trying to reach for his wallet.
With registration, and that he also, you know, where it was positioned at.
Is this just another example of why we need more training or communication between law enforcement and the general public?
I don't think it's just communication. I think that's a good point, but I think what we really need is we need anti-racism training. We need to get to the underpinnings of the psyche of white supremacy and some cops, and they happen to also be African-American cops too. The implicit bias that will have a cop see me, even though I'm in a suit.
Right.
I could possibly leave Fox News right now, get in my vehicle, get pulled over by a police officer, but the psyche says dark-skinned male, bald-headed, imposing, 6'6", when in fact I'm not any of those things to maybe you, because you and I are in this space together.
Correct.
But to some others, they may see it as intimidating. So there needs to just be conversations, but we really need to have training, and we really need to talk about not just black and white, but also how is it that we can mediate some of this conflict before it occurs. So when you hear that the helicopter is above, he didn't know that the helicopter was for him. We still have no proof that he was the one breaking windows.
Correct.
And if in fact he was the one breaking windows, to your point, which is an excellent point, it should not lend him to lose his life.
A lot of people saying too, well, he was running. Do you think sometimes these suspects are just as fearful as the police officers themselves are?
We talk about why is suspects running, but why are cops patrolling while racist? or with the implicit bias. So if you look at Walter Scott in South Carolina, he was running, and we saw that case. We saw the video footage where the cop shot him in the back and then planted the taser right next to him. And so, you know, when we grew up in urban areas, oftentimes we were told that if we don't know a person, run. Once again, these police officers never identified themselves as police officers. Where did he run to? He ran back to his home. Where did he get killed? Right in his home.
his
and
backyard.
Why? Because of a cell phone.
Cell phone. Of course, they're saying this is going to be a long investigation, and the cops are on administrative leave, as they usually
Yeah.
are. So this will be a conversation for quite some time.
Once again.